Hi, it's Corbett Harrison, and this is part 2 of my Teaching Creativity or Teaching Creatively, which has the strongest impact on a student-centered classroom videos. And I'm going to be really honest with you. I posed that question, and like many of the questions I ask my students, I don't know the answer to it. I think it's a question that's worthy of discussion as we explore how to bring more creativity into our classrooms for those learning styles who appreciate creativity. I think all learning styles appreciate a choice, and that's why one of my favorite quotes that inspires me when I design lessons is, "Without freedom of choice, there is no creativity, and without creativity, there is no life." I will once again allow you to try to guess which famous person that quote is attributed to. The answer is Dr. Benjamin Spock. I am a huge proponent of choice. I have said in previous videos that things like my Italian menu of writing ideas that I designed for my students, it took me a little longer to design the tool, giving students 3 choices in every area rather than just 1 choice. Once I have it created, the time investment has paid off because I do see my students thrive creatively, even those who don't consider themselves to be creative, when choices are available to them. I completely buy into the Dr. Benjamin Spock quote. And I also completely admit that when designing choices, it does take a little bit longer, but if you design well, the time makes it worth the investment. This is a menu that teachers I worked with actually created, very similar to the Italian menu of ideas I give my students, which is ideas for things they can write about, writing prompt choices. This particular menu, I was pleased with the teachers' creation because these are choices they were going to give to their students to allow them to revise a draft of writing that they were working on. I once watched a really bad lesson on revision where the teacher said, "I want everyone to revise, no choice. Everyone to revise in this way, no choice. Everyone has to add 5 ly adverbs to their draft." And, you know, I teach writing. I kind of write myself. And I just have to tell you, I know for a fact that adding ly adverbs to papers does not necessarily make them better. It made them 5 words longer and made the sentences a little bit meatier, but ly adverbs do not necessarily improve writing. And so we did a class on revision where we created menus for the students, where students got choices of things that they could choose to revise rather than one formula fits all or everybody revises for this. The students who used these menus thrived creatively because the choices were there for them. And so again, just another example of choice. Now in my classroom, I totally believe in the concept of routines. Once my students, I want my students not to be surprised. I want them to know that every day we do a little this, every Friday we do a little this. We establish routines early on in my classroom because once they understand the routine and know when things are due, they allow themselves to be more creative as well. I have a really great routine that I'm very proud of. I've been developing for the past 4 or 5 years called Vocabulary Workshop. And it's very choice-driven. And even if you don't teach vocabulary, I'd like you to kind of just listen to some of the principles and some of the things that happened as a result of it being routine and the fact that all learning styles were playing along in this particular routine. And so here's basically how a vocabulary workshop works. Every student selects 4 words a week that they feel are words that they want to add to their vocabulary. These can come from stuff that we're reading together as a class. They can come from an independent book that they are reading. They are always to be on the lookout for words that they want to add to their own vocabulary. I have created for them 10 different choices of ways that they can write or research the word that they're interested in a short way for the purpose of sharing their writing or their research with another student. My rule is there are 10 activities, and each week they cannot repeat an activity. So each week they're absolutely doing 4 different activities from my list of activities that I will show you in a moment. And then the student-centered element of my workshop is that on every other Friday, when the students have 8 words, I'm trying to show you 8, there you go, 8 words, we call that publishing day, where they are to go around to different students and they teach their 8 words to them. by sharing the writing and the research they've done on those words. Now, I was taught vocabulary in a very non-choice environment. We were given 10 words every week to memorize, and we took a quiz on them, and then once the quiz was over, we pretty much forgot the words because we didn't have any ownership in those words. I wanted my vocabulary workshop to be different because I want students to celebrate the concept of good words to add to your vocabulary. This is an example of what a student would bring in on a Friday, and this is Taylor's 4 words. These look like words he got from Rocket Boys, which is one of the books we read. Up in the upper left-hand corner, for example, he has researched the word stolid, and he has found 4 good synonyms and 4 good antonyms, and then he's visually represented those. That's one of the activities, for example. Here's another student, 6th grader, Hannah, came up with these 4 words that she found in the book Unwind, which we were reading together as a class, and her 4 activities are there. Hannah has used my online form that the students can click from my website and open. She printed it out and she wrote in it, so she has equal boxes, but a lot of my students do what Dawson has done here. They actually type and then they use clip art because they don't think they can draw in the 4 boxes instead, and so students can use my online form in those 2 ways, for handwriting or for typing. And then the amazing thing that happens, especially with my gifted and talented students, is they find things online. Like this is a program called Comic Life. It's a website. You can get a 30-day free trial, and so they use it for 30 days, but it allows you to set up a 4-panel comic strip that looks like a comic strip with its fonts and the way that it presents things. And she has her, Mimi here, has used Comic Life to present her 4 words. What I like about Comic Life, and this was the subject of my previous video on creativity, is creativity becomes contagious. Mimi brings this in, shows it to students. Suddenly the next week I have 3 students using this program. The next week I have 6 students using this program. Creativity is contagious, and so when they find something like this, it catches on. Now here are the 10 activities I give to my students, and my style of creating choices is I try to make logical or formulaic choices for students, so they have the safety of logic or formula to think in, and then I have creative tasks which don't require formula and some logic, but formula is free form are the basis of the creative tasks. And then I tend to have some tasks that are a little bit of each, and so my 10 activities that I have designed for the students, 4 of them are logical formula tasks, 4 of them are creative tasks, and 2 of them are middle-of-the-road tasks. And over 10 to 12 weeks, I teach the students these different activities, and then they get to make choices. Again, remember, they can repeat no activity in the same week, and my hope is that they're choosing from the different places, so they're exercising not only their creative side of their brain, but also their logical side of their brain. I'm going to show you some of the activities and how they work, but what I want you to understand is the writing that my students do when they borrow a vocabulary word out of a book. If the book used it in one context, like the book used the word in a hospital, and the word in the hospital, they have to find a completely different context to try to use the word, because that shows that you own a word if you can find a different context for it. So one of the 5 activities, this is one of the logical ones because it's formulaic, is called imp, int, exclam sentences. It's a tricky way to teach my students the 4 sentence types: imperative, interrogative, exclamatory, and declarative. I'm going to zoom in. Oh, let me go back. Each of these, my students have a binder, but they also can get these online. Each of them comes with the 5 criteria of what they have to do to get full points on this activity. And then it also comes with the teacher exemplar, which is what you're looking at. This is the one I created. What you're seeing here with the imperative one is they start with an imperative command, and that follows with a declarative sentence. The second one is an interrogative question, followed by a declarative sentence. And the third one is an exclamatory sentence with an exclamation point, followed by a declarative sentence. And in each set, they have to find a different context to use the word. This inspires my students to create their own. Here's Patrick's for the word myriad that he created. A second activity that they can choose from, and this is one of the more creative activities, is they can personify the word. They can pretend the word is a person's name and then apply the person's personality, job description, whatever, to what the word means. Here's my teacher model for the word defenestrate. Defenestrate is one of my favorite words. It means to throw someone or something out a window. I created a personified character who's a stuntman, and I describe why the word means why the way that I personified it. So here's a student example. Rebecca did this one for the word incredulous. Here's EGOT sentences, which I'm really proud of because this is one of my own creation. It was for my understanding learners. There are some vocabulary words that actually have a noun, a verb, an adjective, and an adverb form. Not all of them, but there are some words that you can find that when you dig for the word in the dictionary. And if they can find a word that does that, they can create an EGOT sentence. I'm not going to explain why we call it EGOT because I don't have time, but the product they have to create once they've done their research is they have to create one silly sentence where all four of those four forms of the word are used and some sort of context is inside the sentence. And so here's my example for the word interrogative. And here's one of my students' example for the word harmonious. Feel free to pause to spend a little more time looking at these. Showing sentences is another of the creative ones. I'm a big believer in action verbs to show good writing, and so a showing sentence requires students to fill their sentence with at least three different underlined vocabulary verbs, not vocabulary verbs, just verbs. And when they become 8th graders, they're required to not only underline them, but they're required to identify them as transitive or as intransitive, as you can see here in my example. And here's a student example. This is a 7th grader's example because he's not having to identify, Tyler did not have to identify if it was transitive or intransitive, but he's going to use this sentence on a Friday to teach his fellow students what that particular word means by sharing the writing he did about it. And then finally, one of the between both logical and creative, here's a haiku. Haiku is my tricky way. It's got a formula to it. It has to be 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables, but it also has to be about nature, which requires you coming up with a creative use of the word in that context. And so my example is for scrutinize. And here is Matt's example for the word onslaught. Haikus, all right, short but formulaic. So these 10 activities come into play. And again, on Fridays, they come in with, they start off pretty regular, but then about 10 or 12 weeks in it, I start seeing the creativity happen. Here's the sort of thing I start getting from the students because they're taking the process and the routine seriously. That was Emily's example. This is Jason's example. Jason was very much into memes and into the syndicated show Scrubs, and so he made many of his words all somehow fit the TV show and the memes that he found from that TV show. Bigger is sometimes better to students, and so Serene made this huge poster-sized version of her words with 3-dimensional things on it. Some students like to go that route. Ethan was very much into Calvin and Hobbes. He was trying to become an artist, making faces like Calvin and Hobbes, and so his often turned out to be Calvin and Hobbes looking in nature. And then some students just start doing creative things knowing there's going to be 8 words eventually that they have to teach every other Friday. And Ryan here became very good at putting them in file folders and dividing them up in interesting ways. 4 words on the left, 4 words on the right. He turned these in one by one, and then he ultimately used the folders to teach one another. And then based on that, you get amazing examples like this. There are 8 words here in this amazing display because with choice, the students start to really thrive creatively. That's the experience I have. And so I love my students for that reason. Once they get the routine down, once they realize they're allowed to be creative, you start getting things like this that are totally amazing. And so choices, logical and creative, and then middle of the road ones, build this. And then the other amazing thing that happens, and I have to do this quickly, I invite my students about 3/4 of the way through the year to start inventing their own activities for vocabulary. And I'm just going to quickly go through these. Here's Mason's. He created a vocabulary-inspired phone app. The word had to be the name of the phone app, and he had to describe what it did, and he had to come up with a review. Completely student-created idea. The students like horror movies, and so they came up with the idea of a fake horror movie poster where the word has to appear in the title or in the tagline, and they had to provide an illustration for it. Don't really like Yo Mama jokes, but my students decided, hey, can we use exaggeration and make our own Yo Mama jokes, which of course they loved, and so here's a good one. This is one of my favorites that the students created. It's called word art, where they visually capture what the word means, and then I make them explain what the visions mean. This is Audrey's word for taught, and it's got some cool descriptions there if you want to pause and look at them. But based on my choices, students then creatively start building their own choices. And so if you're interested in these ideas, look me up on